it's a great day for James when you wake up in the morning and see your Twitter trends. The Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Yeah, it's wonderful. So what are we going to do today? Oh, we're ranking every single Spider-Man movie. Let's go. What's going on, you guys? James here, and yes, today I am sitting down with you guys and going through every single Spider-Man motion picture. We're not talking about anything like Italian Spider-Man or Spider-Man from overseas. We're gonna keep it domestic, but still, these movies are fantastic. They're a huge part of not only my childhood, but so many others. But before we get into that, and I give you what my number one Spider-Man movie is, if this is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James. Now, if you're wondering who that is, that's me, and I love talking all about movies. So if you like what you hear and what you see, go ahead and hit the big red button below and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to go ahead and hit the little bell right next to it just to stay up to date with anything new. Kind of like my Code 8 review. But, you know, there's been so much more to talk about. You know, Sam Raimi, not a big deal, right? Not the biggest director. He's only directing Doctor Strange too. Such amazing news. And if you haven't heard, we've actually gotten our first look at Dune, the movie directed by Denis Villeneuve. And I cannot wait for this film. If you've seen Blade Runner 2049 or even Prisoners, you know what he can bring to the table. You can find all the links to those videos in the description below. Now, I'm not gonna waste any more time. We're gonna hop right into me ranking all 8 Spider-Man movies, starting with the worst to the best. But maybe we should level the playing field a little bit, right? Let's go through every single Spider-Man movie and maybe talk about it before I rank them. You know, it would be kind of nice. Let's go ahead and start with the Sam Raimi trilogy back in the early 2000s. For many, this is their childhood. This is what started the superhero comic book movie phenomenon, honestly. There have been so many bad superhero movies in the early 2000s. I mean, even all the way through 2009 or 2008 or so. But once Marvel started picking up steam, I think, unfortunately, the Sam Raimi movies got put in the back burner, and we can't forget what he did for superhero movies. I mean, Spider-Man 1, 2, and as much as I hate to admit it, 3, kind of laid down a certain foundation that I don't think anyone else could have achieved like Sam Raimi. And he did so gracefully, although he kind of exited that trilogy not so gracefully, but we'll talk about that. However, then it took 5 years to go ahead and create another potential Spider-Man trilogy over at Sony Pictures with The Amazing Spider-Man, and director Mark Webb had his hands all over 1 and 2. Unfortunately, so did the studio and a lot of writers. Yeah, that movie, at least that potential trilogy, fell flat on its face after 2. But we didn't have to wait too much longer for a solo Spider-Man movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with 2017's Spider-Man Homecoming, directed by John Watts. He also directed Far From Home a couple years after that. And you guys, I am in love with Tom Holland as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. We're gonna talk all about that, I promise you, when we break down the individual movies and where they rank. But man, the MCU is in great hands with this Spider-Man. But in between Homecoming and Far From Home, we got what is arguably one of the best, I'm not going to tell you where it's ranked, Spider-Man movies that I've ever laid my eyes on. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Actually, you might find it hard to believe, but Sony Pictures was the one to develop this film, or at least produce it and then distribute it. They redeemed themselves for Spider-Man 3 because of this film. I'll just say that. I'll, of course, break it down a little bit more in a bit. Gosh, I want another one, and I'm so glad we're getting one. Okay, so now that we've kind of at least broken down some of the films and where they lie timeline-wise, why don't we just go through and start with number 8. Okay, this was not hard. I legit went through 1 through 8, and I was like, what's the worst Spider-Man film? And it's hands down Spider-Man 3. You guys can't tell me that this movie isn't awful. I mean, it is one of the worst superhero movies that I've seen. Now, it's not the worst superhero movie that I've seen, but the big issue here is that Sam Raimi was not only on his way out, but he had a vision for where he wanted to go with the 3rd film. Unfortunately, Sony Pictures, and now this is all reported, of course, said now we have our own intentions, and I think what they wanted to do was try to get a ton of villains in one movie. So unfortunately, what happened is, yeah, we got some cool scenes with the symbiote suit for Spidey, but then we had some issues with Sandman being thrown in there, and it didn't really work for me, and there was just too much going on at one time. Not only that, we had to get Hobgoblin and all this, and it was just a big old mess. And that's the problem with Spider-Man 3 is that nothing was fluid compared to the previous 2 Spider-Man movies, and then Tobey Maguire kind of phoned it in. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, one of the worst scenes that I think I've ever seen in a Spider-Man movie. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. That finger gun sequence, geez, is just so out of place, and it's just so forced. The humor didn't ride here like the first 2. Yeah, I just wasn't a huge fan of this one at all. Also, you guys, if James Franco was not playing Hobgoblin in Spider-Man 3, I haven't seen the movie in a while, please correct me and put it in the comments below. But let's move on to number 7, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like I said, directed by Mark Webb, in the last of what could have been a trilogy for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. Listen, a lot of people have been talking about Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker and how much they love him and how he's underrated, and some people even said he's the best Peter Parker. I'm not gonna lie to you, I think he's probably the best Spider-Man, and the reason I say that is because of his infighting dialogue. Just like the first film, it's so funny, quippy, and it's everything that you come to expect from a Spider-Man movie. I mean, it really is the comics ripped off and then pasted onto the screen in some moments. I did love how the action is directed, and I'm a big fan of Jamie Foxx as Electro here. I liked him being this weird, quirky, geeky dude who was unfortunately kicked to the side one too many times, and when given a lot of power, he definitely took advantage. And I am in love with that big New York Times, you know what I'm talking about, Times Square, right? It was so cool, man. Like, all of the visual effects were on point. I think there's a huge crescendo at the end, and I do love that death scene. Gwen Stacy falling in the tower clock, and you know, Spidey trying to save his love, and it didn't work out too well. That ripped my heart out of my chest, and I think it was very well shot, directed, and acted on both Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield's part. But then the problem is, you get like this new Goblin, and I get it. I understand, you know, it's not that I hated the presentation, it was the execution I think that I had an issue with. I really do like Dan DeHaan's Goblin, and I love the way he plays the character. Very down, broken. It is a cool, again, representation, but I just don't think the execution was great, and unfortunately they wanted to ham-fist in Sinister Six references, Rhino at the end. I mean, I get it, Sinister Six is a huge adversary for Spider-Man. It's something that hasn't been done on the big screen before. I think we'll get it with the MCU, but we haven't gotten it yet. And they wanted it so bad. The only problem is, not only did it underperform, it didn't do well critically. And I think because of that, Sony got scared and once again abandoned another Spider-Man property. It's so weird to me that Sony was so quick to just jump off the bandwagon at any given moment. And maybe that's the issue, is that there wasn't a lot of passion fueled into this Spider-Man entry, and that's why it's my number 7. Okay, so number 6 is a tough one. I was going back and forth, and many of you are probably going to be mad. So if you're mad with my number 6, you can let me know in the comments. But number 6 is Spider-Man 1. I know, put the pitchforks down, but I recognize this film's greatness, okay? It's just the film that I have above it, I liked a little bit more because it spoke to me, I guess, as a Spidey fan. However, this is a movie that hits hard in the nostalgia department. I remember where I was when I saw this movie. I remember hearing on rides to school, radio DJs talking about how the filming, sorry, lack of a better words, in New York City was going great. And I mean, listen, I didn't know about Sam Raimi, I was a kid, but I knew about Tobey Maguire, and I definitely knew about Spider-Man. From the trailers, to the poster art, to even the final product, this set a foundation for superhero movies that, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, would not have been possible without Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire. So it is such a beautiful film. And it's also one of the few Spider-Man movies that has a single writer. I mean, writer David Cope, he did a good job at getting everyone kind of accustomed to a live-action Spider-Man movie of this scale. And I'm glad there was only one writer. The problem is, with most future Spider-Man movies, you get like 5 or 6 writers, and it's insane. I also got plenty scared with Green Goblin in this. Willem Dafoe is a wonderful actor, but there's this moment, there's actually multiple moments, where I was spooked. And even as a kid owning the toy, I'd have to put it in the toy box and say, you know what, not today. I cannot look at this. But it's so great. I've rewatched it multiple times, and I really do think it is one of the best Spider-Man movies. Like I said though, my number 5, I like just a little bit more. Oh, and before we move on, there's another reason why I wanted this as number 6. It's because Tobey Maguire in high school doesn't speak to me. He's actually looking like a lot older than most high schoolers that I know. Or I knew, I should say. He didn't look like a high schooler at all, and that was an issue. It broke the immersion for me. Okay, so moving on to number 5. The Amazing Spider-Man, the first one. And again, directed by Mark Webb. And sure, there were a few writers on here, and if I'm not mistaken, actually, let's go back. There's James Vanderbilt, Alvin Sargent, Stephen Kloves. That's a lot. You know, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, there's almost too many hands in the pot with these Sony Spider-Man movies, especially The Amazing Spider-Man. I don't have an issue with the movie having multiple writers if it comes out great, but unfortunately it's always a red flag when you see 2 or more screenplay writers, and in this case there was actually nothing inherently bad about the movie. It's just, for me, it fell off when it came to everyone outside of your lead cast. I do love Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben and Sally Field as Aunt May, but I can't tell you guys that they did the origin story too well. And if anything, at that point, I was just super tired of the Spider-Man origin story. We've known about this story for years. Can we go on to something new? Let's get a fresh approach. And it stuck to the formula of old, and that was a problem for me. But Rhys Ifans as Dr. Kurt Connors, or the Lizard, was insane. There's this sequence of events where Spidey gets a huge web together and he's got a camera there so he can capture a photo of the Lizard. And I think it's really neat that Andrew Garfield is so playful with the Doctor and the Doctor's so serious. It's a nice contrast. Again, the biggest compliment I can give to these Mark Webb movies is that he knows how to direct the romance. The connection between Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield was the best connection. It only is rivaled maybe a little bit by Zendaya and Tom Holland. But maybe it helps too that Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield were dating at that time. So the Peter Parker Gwen Stacy love was real, and I absolutely was there for it, and I shipped them so hard. Okay, so moving on to my number 4 Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Homecoming. It's a movie that, I won't lie to you guys, I was super down on the first time I watched it. Too much Tony Stark influence, and it didn't really hit me in the gut. Even the villain wasn't so great in this. Vulture is one that I wanted to see on the big screen for a while, and it was rumored to either be in Spider-Man 3 or 4 at some point if Sam Raimi went on to direct the rest of those movies. However, on second watch, I was like, okay, John Watts, let's see what you got here, because I think I was looking at it for what I wanted to see out of a Spider-Man movie and not what it was giving to me as a Spider-Man movie. And on second watch, I can confidently tell you that I really do love this movie. I think Michael Keaton is great as Vulture. His motivations are definitely understood. I love Zendaya so much. Tom Holland is a great Peter Parker and Spider-Man. I think he's not the best in either category by itself, but together his mix of both is really cool. It's innocent and he actually looks like a high schooler. Crazy, right? Man. But one of the biggest gems in Spider-Man Homecoming was the addition of Ned, played by Jacob Batalon, and oh my goodness, his humor, his quippy one-liners, the awkward teenage chemistry, it's so fun just to witness. And in traditional MCU fashion, there's a lot of implications for the rest of the cinematic universe. I love that it's all interconnected, and this is probably a film that would have worked even without the other Spider-Man movies. It was just so refreshing to see Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios take on what is going to be one of probably the most important Spider-Man movies to come, only because of its foundation and what it's laying out for the rest of the MCU. So yeah, man, Spider-Man Homecoming is just so good. Okay, we're getting into the top 3 now, so at my number 3 spot for Spider-Man movies is Spider-Man Far From Home. And let me tell you guys, the minute the movie started, from when it ended and then I got home, I think I loved it more and more and more. Like, my love for Spider-Man Far From Home has just grown. Like, every day I think I just want to watch it more and more, but it's not on Disney Plus, and I'd have to rent it or buy it. I should just buy the movie. But man, I think that John Watts does a great job at mixing in a bigger, more epic feel to his action sequences. In the addition of Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio, it's so good. He's fantastic. He's very suave and calculated. I think that his performance really kind of flew under the radar for most people because they were focused on Tom Holland and they were focused on the visual effects, which is really impressive. Don't get me wrong, that illusion sequence with Spidey and Mysterio is one of the best sequences, not even just in superhero movies, but in movies in general. I just think Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio and then outside of the Mysterio outfit is really good. He's such a jerk in this film, and I loved it because this is a great example of how you can properly take a comic book series, throw it on the big screen, and add a certain twist to it. Because I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a twist in this movie that blew my mind in the theater, and I thought, man, they did that, didn't they? They really did that. Like I said, the action's big, the script is fluid, Tom Holland is again greater than he was in Spider-Man Homecoming. You can just tell he's falling into his own, and I love the budding romance between him and Zendaya. Zendaya is so great, man. I cannot wait for her in Dune, but everything she touches is gold. I am so in love with this movie. I'm probably gonna watch it today already. Get into the top 2. Now, I almost forgot to say something. I need to preface this list because I did rank Spider-Man films on this channel once before when it was Reflect the Screen and Not Real James. My rankings have changed a little bit. If you want to revisit that, you can, and so has the setup and everything. But I think what's really important is that as I grow older, my rankings change a little bit. So I was really happy to go back and do this list once again. So number 2, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I was glowing about this at the beginning of this video, guys, but let me tell you guys, the art style here is the best that I think I've ever seen, not only in a Spider-Man movie, because clearly the other ones are live action, but in general, man. I think in an animation film, you have to nail, well, the animation and the art style first, or it's a distraction for the rest of the film. But here, it felt like I was watching a comic book. And that sounds funny, but it's so true. Not only was it my favorite movie of 2018, but at the time I actually considered putting it as the #1 Spider-Man movie on my list. Let's just go down the list of who's in this movie in terms of voice acting, because it's gonna blow your mind if you haven't seen this movie yet. And if you haven't, well, what are you waiting for? Shameik Moore as Miles, Jake Johnson as Peter B. Parker, Mahershala Ali as Uncle Aaron, Brian Tyree Henry as Jefferson Davis, Haley Steinfeld as Gwen Stacy, and even Zoe Kravitz as Mary Jane. Listen, you guys, that is just an insane voice acting lineup, but there are more. There's more to be found in this movie. Every time I think about this film, I pick out a new favorite scene, because I think it's just one of those rewatchable films. The replay value here is high, and that's because Phil Lord did an amazing job. Everyone was doing the Peter Parker thing, right? And then I saw it with MCU, and I figured, okay, we're probably not going to get Miles Morales live action, but this is the closest we'll get to a Miles Morales-led Spider-Man film, and I think it's just absolutely beautiful. I mean, I'm looking at my notes now, and I really do have to say that the epic feel is there. There's this moment, there are many moments actually, but the one moment that got me is when Miles Morales is about to dive off the building, and I was like, yo, man, am I watching a Spider-Man movie right now? Because I am just blown away. And even for fans that don't like animation, I think you'll fall in love. And I actually spoke to people who didn't see any of the other Spider-Man movies, or maybe saw bits and pieces, and they fell in love with this. So I think non-comic book fans and comic book fans alike can come together and say confidently that Into the Spider-Verse is going to go down in history as one of the best superhero films, because guys, it transcends Spider-Man. This movie is a masterpiece. Now you're probably asking, why is this not my #1? Well, there's one minor gripe that holds it back, and that's this aesthetic within the art style. I don't know what happened, but one too many times from the middle to the end of the film, I noticed it looked like you're watching a movie, a 3D movie, without the 3D glasses. I hated it because it was so distracting in some scenes, and I was getting away from the dialogue and asking, is the projector broken, this and that, and that's what really held it back. And unfortunately, it still holds true at home. It wasn't the projector, it's just the style. It's intentional, and I get it, that's fine, but it did hold it back for me a little bit. Okay, so moving on to my #1 Spider-Man movie of all time. Process of elimination should tell you what my #1 is. Spider-Man 2, directed by Sam Raimi. Boy, this was the one. I mean, Alfred Molina as Doc Ock, fantastic villain. One of the best big battles at the end there. Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker and Spider-Man. He finally hits his stride. The romance between him and Mary Jane, played by Kirsten Dunst, was just there, blossomed fully. It was beautiful. James Franco's this weird, quirky guy. You know, he plays a great Harry Osborn. There's not just one thing I can tell you that this movie does great, because it does many things well. Not only is it shot in such an inventive way by Sam Raimi, and this is what, in my opinion, set forward and set the bar higher for superhero films, even to this day. I think the writing here is just more mature. I love that it's a little bit darker. I think it's fun. It really just blends together a great feel of vindication for Spider-Man fans, because a lot of people said these movies were like childish, this and that, and like, you know, if you still read comic books, you're just kind of a kid. And I understand that sentiment from some people, but I can tell you confidently that, man, these movies don't make you tear up. I'm a grown man and I tear up in some scenes, especially that train stopping sequence. It's such a cool feeling, and sure, nostalgia rides high on this one, but I do love how this movie makes you just feel overall, and especially when you walk away from this movie, you can just take this amazing breath of air and say, hey, Sam Raimi's got himself the best Spider-Man movie to date. And it's old, man. It's 2004, but I don't care because it still holds up to this day. It is a big blockbuster film. It has the flair of a superhero movie, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, which I love. I think that this was what gave me so much hope for Spider-Man 3, and then when Spider-Man 3 fell flat on its face, unfortunately, that's what made it the worst Spider-Man movie for me, is because the bar was set here, and I knew it was Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, and you have that product. But for me, I just can't tell you that I'll ever rank a Spider-Man movie above 2. I would have to see something from Tom Holland's Spider-Man movies to put that above Spider-Man 2, because, yeah, man, every time I look at this list and make a new list, Spider-Man 2 always falls on top, and I love that so much. Alrighty, you guys, well, there you have it. That's my rankings of every single Spider-Man movie to date. I hope you enjoyed everything you just heard and saw, and I have not stopped smiling. I love Spider-Man so much. I'm looking around my room, and I can point out to you guys like 5 Spider-Man things right now. It's not your time to shine, Flash. Before you head out, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the big red button below and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to tap on the bell right next to it, just to stay up to date with anything new. Like this video, share with all your Spidey friends, and in the comments below, give me your rankings of the Spider-Man movies. Do you agree with my rankings, or do you disagree? Because if you disagree, we're about to have a fisticuffs with words. Also, stay tuned to the channel because, guys, we're getting really close to an amazing milestone, the biggest for this channel, 1,000 subscribers, and I'm so excited. We're gonna do something really nice on that day, and I'm really looking to get the entire community involved, all of my real friends. You like to play on words there? And just stay up to date on social media, guys. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, so we'll talk and we'll discuss more movies and TV shows there. Stay safe, stay sane, and again, I love you guys so much. Alrighty, I'm gonna web sling my way out of here. Thanks so much for watching, you guys, and I'll catch you at the next screening. It's not working today.